Hello and welcome to a relatively sad evening. This is, in fact, our very last Kaplan Instagram Live. So if you're out there, good to see you. And as I say, welcome to the session that we started off. I'm just looking at my notes here. It was the 2nd of April. So we've been doing this for 3 months. And if you remember, the idea of this is effectively to look at how we provide a service to students, providing them information, what to do, study tips in this time, an overriding message of actually not sort of wasting this time. And the third part is remaining as positive as we can. And for this last session, a very special guest indeed. We've got Montanna Stafford from AAT. She's the product manager for students. And as if by magic, it looks like Montanna has jumped on the call. Hi, Montanna. How's things?
Hello, Stuart. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm very good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm just putting myself in my little box that I am encouraged to do at this time. So just briefly then, just to sort of say that all of these events have had a particular theme. I'd say they fit under the sort of 3 headings. This one sits alongside tips and hints, really. And Montanna's here to talk to you really about, I suppose, the topic that we've had a sort of most conversation away in principle, which is time, i.e. that this has been a period of time or a period in time that we've had more time than ever before, although it might not seem like it. And of course, as time runs away, the pubs do open actually. So it all seems slightly symmetrical that this should be our sort of final session. So Montanna, your session is about thinking about time differently, obviously looking from a student's perspective. And I know that when we spoke, you were talking about breaking time up, thinking about studying and studying sort of obviously remotely, but thinking about how students can break time up into different chunks. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. I think, to be honest, obviously for everyone at the moment, life is probably a little bit different with COVID-19, whether that means that you have more time on your hands because you're at home, or even less time on your hands because you're working from home and maybe homeschooling, or have a lot of little people running around the place. All in all, life is going to be very different for you. And as well as life being different, your studying is probably very different as well. You might be used to going into a classroom and having maybe 2 hours a week where you devote to your studying and really commit that time, and that isn't a possibility at the moment. So that might feel like you've been thrown a little bit off course by not having that chance to go into the classroom. Or even if you are used to studying from home, your life commitments and your day-to-days probably change quite a bit. And that can throw us off a little bit, I think, because our day-to-day routines for most of us has changed. I think it puts fear into people if they haven't got a large amount of time to study. So if you haven't got an hour or two where you can sit down, not to be disturbed by anyone, with your books and your notepads, and really commit that time, you feel like, what's the point? It's like, if I can't get that time anymore, then I'm not going to really be able to succeed. And this is where, for me personally, I've thought a lot recently. My setup at home is now working from home full-time, husband working from home full-time with a 2-year-old running around. So that's been interesting, to say the least. And recently I was listening to a podcast from a doctor who has been spending the last few years trying to help his patients think about their health in a different way. And one of his tricks and tips is that every day you should try and spend 5 minutes on your physical health, 5 minutes on your emotional health, and 5 minutes on your mental health, which sounds very simple. So one of the ideas he gave was every morning he would come downstairs and put on his coffee machine. Now, for most people, caffeine is the way they start the day. So he would do that no matter what. And in those 5 minutes while he's waiting for the coffee machine to get going, he would do a workout. So he'd have some weights in the kitchen and he would do a small workout every morning. Now that might not sound like much, but 5 minutes every day doing a good workout was actually contributing to his physical health and his mental health as well. where usually most people like myself would probably scroll on Instagram or some sort of social media channel. So he was just trying to get us to think that in your day-to-day routine, you might be able to find gaps or opportunities where you could access maybe learning or focus on your personal health in a different way, I suppose. And I
Yeah.
thought it was quite a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You're right, really, to sort of pick into that, because I always make this generalisation that people have had more time because they're not going out anywhere, they're not travelling to work. But equally, time has a nasty habit of slipping away, doesn't it? And by focusing on tasks that seem to be achievable, i.e., 5-minute tasks, and maybe making those 5-minute tasks a habit, so that you're doing them every day, a bit like that's another way of almost sticking a 15-minute worth of activities within 5-minute chunks within the day itself. So it's really, really quite interesting. Just to say, if anybody has any questions for Montanna or for me, if you want to sort of pop them in the panel, we'll do our very best to sort of to pick them up. So let me just summarise that then, Mon. So it's 5-minute. It's sort of 5-minute utilising it, and I suppose the other thing is it's this sort of idea of learning outside the formality of a classroom or a course. It's cutting into that part. And one of the things that you'd mentioned to me before was that it's useful, therefore, to have a variety of different types of resources that you could have available that will sort of slot in with this flexible approach to studying, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it links really nicely. I think we don't have maybe the time to sit down with all of your textbooks and your notepads to be able to commit time to study for an hour like you did in the past. But AAT, we focused a lot on creating resources that allows you to maybe listen to the content or watch the content, so videos or podcasts or some online quizzes, which are shorter and easier to access. And I think if you can think about different ways to digest the content and the learning that you're trying to do by looking at a variety of resources, for example, if AAT or with your professional body, then you can be picking up tips and tricks and learning throughout the day. So, for example, listening to that podcast while you're running or doing the washing up. Or if you can find some online quizzes and you're trying to get the kids to bed and you're waiting for them to go to sleep, maybe you could spend 5-10 minutes accessing those online quizzes. And I think it's just important to think it doesn't always have to be reading from a textbook to say that you're learning. You're still learning through other methods. And I think that really helps look at your day very differently.
Yeah. And I suppose the other thing is it's that sort of bite size. I mean, Captain, we're a formal educational business, that takes a student from A to D in preparation for an exam. But there are many different pathways to get there. And one of the things about the informality of sort of what we would call micro-learning, the sort of bite-sized little bits of information that you can gather along the way that sometimes put the formal learning in context. So I suppose to a certain extent what you're saying is there's nothing, you can study from a textbook, but actually the idea of then little bits, and news is such a good media, Montanna, isn't it? The business news that sits alongside where there's a term that's perhaps referred to, quantitative easing or something to do with the economy that sits alongside, and you sort of go, well, go and look that up, go and find out what that particular term is.
I think it's that supplementing it. It's
yes.
You can read the theory of something, but sometimes to really understand how it works in practice, you need those additional, I suppose, bite-sized chunks of insight. So that whether that be from the news and how it works in practice, or whether that be from experiences of other people, it just might help you digest that content a little better, and the kind of the penny drops.
Yeah, and there's nothing better than I mean, this is I suppose another learning point, isn't it? That real world content has a way of staying with you. It's timely, it's colourful, it's relevant. I shouldn't say this, should I? But a textbook or you know, even a genuinely exciting online lecture isn't can actually seem a little bit, I don't know. Well, I've just got to sit and listen to this and make notes and I go through. It's not. It doesn't always happen. It's maybe not the most engaging sort of things. And I know that I said when we spoke before, you talked a little bit about learning styles in the fact that I think you did you do a history, was it a history degree or something? And you said that you
I did a history degree, yeah.
but you have dabbled in accountancy.
Yes, I have dabbled. So I studied the AAT bookkeeping qualification.
Right.
I passed the AAT bookkeeping qualification, which I'm very proud of because I really struggled with it.
Yeah.
As a person who has history as a background, and that's kind of where I'm comfortable, moving to numbers and that sort of logic just absolutely blew my mind. And for me, I didn't get it just initially from going to the classroom and reading the textbook. I actually got it from talking to my husband because he has studied AAT and he understands it. And to him, it makes perfect sense. To me, it was like learning a different language. And I think that's where the different variety of resources becomes even more important because it might help you just get that little bit that you're probably missing. Oh, now I get it.
Yeah. Yes. I suppose really what you're saying is it's perspective, isn't it? It's a different angle that when you're sat there and you're consuming it in a certain way, and then somebody else says, "Have you thought of it like this? Did you what did you see that on the news today, or listen to this podcast and you get somebody else's sort of views on it?" So when you were studying, what was that the only? Was that the one? What was it? I'm just interested. What was it put you off accountancy? Really, Montana? I mean, isn't it the most interesting subject in the world? I can't. I'm just trying to think how.
Sorry. I don't mean to upset you. I know you're probably quite personally offended by this. It's probably a passion of yours. But for me, it's just not something that initially made sense. But it became a challenge. It became a challenge to learn it and to pass that assessment. And I was very proud of myself, I suppose, when I done it.
Yeah, yeah. So is it the numbers part of it, or I'm just trying to get to sort of, because history, good heavens, I mean, right. And this is the interesting thing about learning styles, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Is that, to a certain extent, I think absolutely everything is interesting. And if you don't think that you don't know it well enough, do you? Do you know what I mean? If you really interested in football, I mean, let's face it, it's just a bit mundane, isn't it? But lots of people are, I understand. And it's just the way that people, and it is trying to create, as a student, trying to create that level of engagement, finding that, because it makes the learning easier. It sounds to you as if it was a bit of a chore. You didn't like it, but by talking to your husband, he brought a different sort of dimension to it.
Yeah, massively.
And I know that one of the other things that you'd mentioned was the idea of peer-to-peer support, which, I suppose your husband was AAT. He was your peer, wasn't he?
Well, he was indeed. He finished it a few years before me, but actually there's a few members of the AAT organisation that have studied AAT, so I reached out to them as well to get some help. And I actually studied AAT with one of my colleagues at the time, so it was quite a good experience to go through that with someone else.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is about there's a benefit in somebody teaching, breaking the subject down, and then this is an area that it's I actually call it the prodigy effect. It's actually got a name, and this idea that asking somebody else to explain something to you in this sort of peer-to-peer, student-to-student environment has got a double hit, hasn't it? There's an element that, if you've got to explain, and look, we get this, as tutors, that when you come to explain something to somebody else, you have to be quite sure that you actually do understand it. So that process of peer-to-peer, and you understand together, I think was your term.
I think it's important to ask for help. I think that's the first thing I would say. Don't be scared to ask for help, because it might be you feel you're struggling on something little and you might be embarrassed to ask for help. But every successful person has struggled at some point, and they've had to learn their skill, whether it's accounting or anything else, at some point, and they've had to get help. I think for me, and maybe it's back to the way my brain works, peer-to-peer support, so reaching out to someone that's at the same stage of learning to you, is going to help you and them, because you can work with someone and talk to someone that understands the concepts at the same level you do. Sometimes if you speak to someone who maybe has got years of experience, they struggle to explain probably something they learned 20 years ago, where if you speak to someone who is at a similar stage of learning, they're more likely to be able to explain it to you if they get it, or you can work together on it. And I think you just mentioned it. If you learn through talking, so if you're to talk something through again and again yourself, then you're more likely to get it. So you're helping your colleague or peer or your classmate at the same time. So that's benefit all round.
Yeah, and it is, and you make a very good point about an expert. And there's quite a lot of research and evidence on this. Is that if you ask an expert what they're doing, they don't always know. So they're not always the best people, and the reason for that is they kind of forget. So there's a danger that they forget what it's like to be a student. So and as a teacher, it's an important feeling to actually say, as I'm explaining this to you, which bit of it doesn't make sense. Because when you've gone over something time and time again, it becomes sort of second nature. And somebody says, well, can you repeat that again? And you go, well, isn't it really obvious? Well, actually, no, it isn't, because they've asked the question. But secondly, having two students together and saying, did you understand this? And they say, no. Well, let's try and figure it out. You think of what that means as a life skill as well. Because, one of the things of any professional qualification, it's got a purpose to it. AAT isn't learning for learning's sake. It isn't it's got a purpose, hasn't it? And that purpose is to provide people with skills in the workplace. And that is going to be a skill. You're going to sit down and your boss is going to say to you one day, you figure this out. You say, I don't really know how to do this. But getting together with a colleague and actually saying, well, how are we going to, that's what students are doing on that sort of peer-to-peer basis.
And it might be difficult at the moment because we're not in the classroom, so you might not have easy access to your classmates, but speak to your tutor, see whether there's something that you can set up in regards to a WhatsApp chat. I know a lot of classes are trying to do that, or there's a lot of forums out there. AAT have student forums. I'd say a lot of training providers have access for students to be able to talk to each other. So there's ways around it. We're doing this remotely. I'm sitting in my living room at the moment. So there's ways of accessing people that are in a similar position to you. And I think it's important as well, not just to help you with your learning, but it's to help with going back to your emotional well-being. Like, it's pretty tough at the moment. I found it tough enough studying when I did and trying to work full-time and just have a social life. And at the moment, trying to find the motivation to study, I can appreciate must be hard. So if you can reach out to someone who's in a similar position to you, I'm sure that's going to be helpful to both you and be motivational to you.
Yeah. And it is, isn't it? And I don't know, and it's probably worth just putting this on the record as well. We struggle sometimes to create an environment the students feel comfortable in talking together to each other. AAT, probably similar. There's always this element that people will talk more if they just talk to each other. You know what I mean? Like, nothing to do with Kaplan, nothing to do with AAT, but we would both support the idea that they do talk. A WhatsApp. I mean, I know WhatsApp has become the watchword, hasn't it? Really, as Zoom has become the social media in lockdown. It's such a useful, simple platform. What question you're doing? How you feeling? Can't do this. Do you mean it's not a question really? It's just a place that you can actually sort of express a view, almost let off a bit of steam, isn't it?
And not feel alone.
And exactly not feel alone. Just as a quick sort of insight as people are sort of dropping in, dropping out. So I'm joined by Montanna Stafford. She's a product manager for AAT. We're talking a little bit about time. If anybody has any questions, please drop them in the panel. Another thing that I know, sort of in this idea of managing time. So you've got this idea that if you can, I suppose, make the most of time by thinking of it in smaller chunks, and the concept of putting resources in it, using time to talk to other people with peer-to-peer support and maintaining that. I know that the sort of third part, what you spoke to me about earlier, was this idea of getting something in the diary and something, I was just looking for the term, this idea of, you used the term called painting the picture, or booking an exam or something along the lines, getting something in the diary that you've got something to target to get yourself sort of on message with, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, as I was saying, paint that picture, both for short term and long term. So short term for your studying probably is book that assessment. I know I've worked for AAT now for 12 years and spent a lot of time talking with students, and a lot of their issue with booking the assessment is, I'm not ready. But actually, if you can book an assessment, even if it's in 2 months' time, you've got something to aim for. You can set out your study plan, even if it is, as I say, 10 minutes a day. You can then make a plan of how you can get to that date and achieve that assessment. But I think it's just human nature that if you don't have something booked, it's very easy to just go, I'll do that next week. And before you know it, the year's nearly gone. Time just flies away from us at the best of times. Speaking from personal experience, I think even if booking that assessment is on the back of you failing, so I studied CIM, the marketing qualification, and the assessment I had to go in to do in an assessment venue where I had to do a written exam, it took me 3 times to pass that. That wasn't great. No one likes failing. And it was pretty hard to go back to the office and go, oh, I failed. Oh, I failed again. But every time I did it, well, the first 2 times where I failed, straight away I had it booked up again, because I knew I'd lose momentum, and I had to make sure that if I committed to the next day, it was in the diary. 3 actually seems to be my magic number, because I failed my driving test twice and I passed on the 3rd time. So yeah, it seems to be the thing for me.
Yeah, and it's such, I don't know, when you look at why, and I say, look, this is the last Instagram event that we're doing. It's, we're hoping that, it's been useful, and that it's, we'll look back on this and say, guess what did we do in that 3 months? You said, well, we managed our time as best. So as people now start to think about, because some people may have just stopped studying, and as they now start to think about what comes next, there's an element of, isn't there, going back to their original motivation, and trying to pick that, and it's funny, all these conversations we had with different people, and so much of it does come down to the human psychology. Once your mind's in the right place, you've got once you're organized mentally, you know where you're going. The actual studying part of it, I'm not saying it's easy, but that, it follows, doesn't it? But whereas, getting back on track, and now sort of lifting your head after this sort of difficult period, and fingers crossed that, we can do this now. I mean, certainly the country's looking to do this a little bit more. Yeah. So lifting your head and looking at that, but sort of booking that exam, and I think you said something about like thinking back of your original motives of, what's the qualification going to do for you, and trying to capture that motivation, I think it's important to remember it. I'm sure for students out there that maybe are working through their qualifications and are maybe 2-3 years in, it's going back to why you did it in the first place. Now, most people probably are studying AAT, any other accounting qualification, or any qualification to change their life, whether that be career or financial, or for a better work-life balance. There's usually a reason behind it that is the bigger picture. And I think it's important to spend some time really visualizing that, because you can lose momentum and lose motivation
oh, actually, I'll stay where I am because I'm not going to achieve this qualification. And this may sound like a marketing cheesy message, but once again, I've worked at AAT for many years, and AAT, any qualification can change your life. I know that sounds really cheesy because it's quite cheesy, but it can. And I think it's important to sit back and remember why you're doing this. And yes, it's going to be hard finding that time every day to get through that assessment. And if you have failed, to pick yourself back up and get that assessment done. But not just the self-achievement you're going to feel at the end of it, but it could mean that next career move or that job security or financial security that you want. And I think it's an important thing to focus the mind on.
Yeah. And it's funny, I wrote when you said that, and you're right, it does sound, and to everybody listening, it does sound cheesy, doesn't it? Because you know, get an AAT or get a professional, and and change your life. But it does. It's just that you don't realise it when you're in it. Do you know what I mean? You only realise it when you reflect back on it. My life is fundamentally different from the life I envisaged as a student when I was just trying to tick off one exam after the other. I didn't think it would change my life when I was doing it, and I didn't. That message didn't come across clearly. But the truth is, it does, and it's a combination of, I think, of the impact the qualification has when you get it. As you've said, I'm very proud of my qualification done with AAT, but secondly, that sort of the stuff that you learn, the stuff that you should be doing it. But it does later in life, stuff comes back and you go, well, at the time I learned it, I didn't think I would ever mean it. I'd ever need it. But now it's become very useful to me. I never knew what I was going to do when I was studying. And my guess is, people, you didn't do history and think you were going to end up with, job roles are changing rapidly as people sort of adapt, I suppose, to the workplace. So that idea, I think, is quite important. I'm looking at time, but I just want to pick your one little thing that you just said that we didn't actually talk about, but I think it's quite interesting. You were very confident then saying that you'd failed something. Do you know what I mean? And that, I think that wasn't part of what we discussed earlier, but I just think that's quite an important message that people go on to achieve. I failed exams, and people go on to achieve things and they fail exams, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is what you do next. And your idea of, well, yeah, I didn't want to do it again, but by putting that sort of date in the diary did mean that you were committed to it.
Yeah.
I think that's all we're looking at.
I can get out now and drive my car, and it doesn't matter whether I took 3 times to pass the test or not. I can now drive the car. It's not something I think about every time. And that marketing qualification, that was a big deal for me to achieve because I worked at it and I was very proud of it. Sorry. And yeah, I think sometimes failure is difficult, or most of the time failure is difficult, but for me, I was proud of it because I picked myself back up and I got on and I achieved it. So yeah, I'm comfortable with admitting it.
Yeah. And it is, I talked about this on one of the other Instagram sessions. The idea is that employers are looking for resilience in people, and somebody who's flown through everything and done everything first time and never met a barrier almost has no experience. Do you know what I mean? At all of adversity. And you won't find a successful person, and you think of sport, they all fail. But, the real ability is picking yourself up and doing it again. So book the exam, I suppose, is the thing. Montana, I'm sorry, I've been trudging on far too much. I want to just sort of pull this to an end. And I just want to ask you a couple of last things. So it's been about sort of managing time and using bite-sized chunks of time, getting access to resources, and then this idea of having some reinvigorating your motivation by thinking about it and taking a very practical step and putting a date in the diary for an exam. What would your takeaways be? A couple of key things, and any resources that AAT have got the students can go and look at?
Yeah, completely. I suppose I probably should say book your assessment, because that's what I'd be keen for you to do. But I think for me, like what we've been talking about here, thinking about your time differently is more about, if you can commit 10 minutes a day to studying, what you might learn in those 10 minutes might be the difference for you passing or failing your exam. So every little bit counts, and don't beat yourself up that it is only potentially 5 minutes a day, because that might make a difference at the end of it. And it doesn't matter how well you pass that exam, it's about passing that matters. So I think it's just keep chipping away at it, keep going. Yeah, think about that bigger picture. And if you have failed or are potentially going to fail, pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and go again. In terms of AAT, for those of you that are listening in today and studying an AAT qualification, we have a lot of great resources online on our new learning portal. So please check that out if you haven't seen it. And a lot of what we've been trying to do recently is develop a variety of resources, as we've talked about. So the podcasts, the videos, the online blogs like our AAT comment. So it isn't just about digesting content in one sort of way. And reach out social channels. So whether that be your training provider or your professional body, social is kind of a new way forward for a lot of people, whether that's been checking in with your peers or getting new resources that maybe you're not going to get elsewhere.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Montanna, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being our very last guest on Kaplan Instagram Live. And good luck, everyone, with whatever the exam future will bring. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.